Greetings, everyone. I am Pardo from Sea of Tranquility. Welcome to another book review on the channel. This is a kind of a side thing we do. In addition to reviewing new album releases, we occasionally do the book reviews, right? And in fact, Count Ralphus and I have another episode of the book club coming up real soon. But I did want to do this one in a separate review because I promised the author that I would do it, and I generally like to review his books as a standalone episode. That person happens to be Mr. Martin Popoff, and this is one of his latest books called Blockbuster, The Sweet Story. Yes, of course, the UK, the great UK glam rock, hard rock, heavy metal band, right? They kind of do a little bit of everything. Early on, they did a little bit of kind of like bubblegum pop, right? Pretty good success story. Maybe this band didn't quite achieve the success that they probably deserved to. But they did pretty well for themselves, but also a band that had its share of problems and things like that. So this book is roughly 250 pages, give or take, right? Packed with information. It's Weimer Publishing. So there's the cover. There's the back. And don't worry, I will put a link to Martin Popoff's website so you can go check this out. But you could probably get this anywhere you buy your books, right, online and whatnot. But I would urge you, if you are in the United States and Canada, to order it directly from Martin, right? So this basically takes you from the very, very beginnings of the band and goes all the way through to very recent times, right? So now 3 of the 4 original members are no longer with us, and you basically have Andy Scott, who is still kind of keeping the flames alive, right? In fact, they released a new album last year, Andy Scott's version of Sweet. But this takes you through kind of like an album-by-album process, which is generally how most of Martin's books do work. What's really interesting here is to read, and again, we saw this quite a bit with a lot of different acts, mainly like, British acts in the 60s and the 70s, is you would have like drastically different releases here in the States as you would over in the UK. So that is indeed the case, or was indeed the case with this band. And so it's kind of really interesting to hear about all the various singles were released and all the original, like in the early years of the band, how they had Chin and Chapman, the 2 guys who co-wrote a lot of their songs and had a very, very different idea of what the band should be like. So you had all these early singles, these like bubblegum pop singles that were really, that it was geared towards, obviously having big singles on the British singles charts, but from an album perspective and certainly what the band were all about at the time, maybe not quite. The two sides really not agreeing much on that, and that didn't last too long. So, of course, we take you through the original Funny How Sweet Cocoa Can Be album, which was not released here in the States. What we got here in the States was like the self-titled album called The Sweet, which was basically comprised of like singles and tracks from Funny How Sweet Cocoa Can Be and whatnot, and all these like, other songs like for here in America we had Little Willie, New York Connection, Wig Wham Bam, Done Me Right All Right, Hellraiser. So some of like the B-sides to the British singles, and the way they did it over there is like they would release the singles that were written by those 2 dudes, right, which were more like pop songs, as the A-side. That was the single. The B-side would be the stuff that the band worked on themselves in a totally different style, and they would be these like crushing hard rock songs. And a lot of that stuff is on this compilation that was released here in the States, which was actually kind of their debut album here, sort of, right? So you had Blockbuster was on side 2, Need a Lot of Lovin', Man from Mecca, Spotlight, You're Not Wrong for Loving Me, right? So, in US and Canada, that was pretty much the debut album, even though it was a compilation of stuff, right? So, and then the second album was actually Sweet Fanny Adams. And here you see a stark difference in tone of what these guys wanted to do, and this this album is full of songs that they wrote themselves. But funny enough, this album not released here in the States. more on that in a second. So here on Sweet Fanny Adams, which is a crushing heavy album, you got Set Me Free, Heartbreak Today, you've got No You Don't, later, done by Pat Benatar, Heartbreak, Set Me Free, later done by Saxon, right? These are great songs. Peppermint Twist, that's more kind of like a pop song. Then you got on side 2, Sweet F.A., which is clearly a heavy metal song. You got Restless, you got Into the Night, another heavy one, AC/DC, another heavy one. So you have a couple songs that are still written by Chin and Chapman, but most of it is all original stuff. Now, then they came out with in 1974 an album called Desolation Boulevard, right? But by this time, they needed to release another album in the States because the self-titled compilation called The Sweet was released in 1973 here, so they need to follow that up here. So basically what they did was they took a couple tracks from the UK version of Desolation Boulevard and a whole bunch of stuff from Sweet Fanny Adams and put out a brand new Desolation Boulevard for American audiences that basically was a compilation of those two albums, right? Very confusing, right? So in the UK, on Desolation Boulevard, you had the 16s, which is terrific. Solid Gold Brass, really good. You had Turn It Down, Medusa, Lady Starlight, The Man with the Golden Arm, Fox on the Run. We would get a different version of Fox on the Run here in the States. Breakdown, and then a cover of My Generation by The Who. So that was the UK version. And over for the US version, you had Ballroom Blitz, which was a single, right? Put on this album now. You had the 16s, No You Don't, AC/DC, I Want to Be Committed, Sweet F.A., Fox on the Run, a new version of it, Set Me Free, Into the Night, Solid Gold Brass, and that was the U.S. version. So very, very different. And, from there, they would go on to release Give Us a Wink, and now we're getting releases in both, same releases both here and over across the pond. You got Give Us a Wink in 1976, another really cool, very heavy album. You got Off the Record in 77, which was probably like the last of kind of like the classic, or especially that era of releases. And I think Off the Record is very, very underrated, and Martin basically states that as well in his chapter on this. I have always thought that's a really strong album. A lot of really good songs on there as well, but no like big massive hits for the band. And then you got Level Headed, right, which has Love Is Like Oxygen, which the band decided to do away with all the heavy stuff, and they wanted to be more of kind of like an art rock band. I like that album. It's very different though. And then, of course, Brian Connolly would leave the band. And then you have albums like Cut Above the Rest and Water's Edge and Identity Crisis to kind of finish out the 70s and move into the 80s. Like I said, we've lost, 3 of them. Andy Scott is still around, but it's a fascinating story. Again, another almost like sad story of a band who probably should have been massive, and just around every corner, something always happened to kind of derail that major success that they should have had. And it's just, it's great to, and one of the things I love about reading books like this is that it makes you want to go out as you're reading and listen to the catalog over again. And in this instance, this is a band who I've liked a lot for many years, but I haven't really spent a lot of time with Sweet's music in a number of years. And I have been listening to the catalog nonstop since I've been reading this book, and it has inspired me to drive another show that we're going to be doing here on the channel very, very soon. I'm not going to give it away because it'll spoil everything. But it's a really, really great band. And like I said, it's filled with, as Martin's books always are, filled with photographs, live photographs, album poster arts, gig poster art, all sorts of stuff. Shots from the studio, and like I said, each chapter is basically dedicated to one of the albums. And then in the back, you get a nice discography as well as a history of the singles and the charts, all the chart positions on all the albums and stuff, and the singles charts, and all sorts of stuff. It's probably one of the ultimate books on this band that you'll ever read. And if you are a fan, I urge you to go get it. So I will put the link down below for you to check it out. Highly, highly, highly recommended for any fan of Sweet. And if you're looking to get into the band, this is a really, really good place to go. So go check it out and visit us on the web at www.seaoftranquility.org. We're on Facebook. We're on YouTube all together all the damn time. Please subscribe if you haven't already and click on that notification bell so you get alert of all of our content as a post. And please do hit the like button before you leave. Also down below, we got the links to our Ko-Fi page for channel donations, our merch page, our Cameo page, and the Sea of Tranquility membership options. All down below there. Thanks everybody who does contribute. It's greatly appreciated, and we'll see you soon here with more stuff. I am Pardo. Thanks for watching this latest book review edition. And like I said, more coming. We have one with Count Ralphus, a kind of more full-blown book club episode where we'll have a bunch of reviews of stuff we've been reading. So that's coming up in just a few days. Thanks for watching. I am Pardo. Enjoy the rest of your week. Bye-bye.